Welcome to season 3 of Flywheel Leadership. I'm excited to welcome Andrew Oxley. Andrew Oxley has 30 years of coaching CEOs and senior leaders on how to accelerate their progress by building winning, sustainable, and scalable teams with strategic impact. He's also created the LeaderShift framework. Welcome, Andrew. I appreciate you sitting down with me today.
Graham, excited to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you taking the time. Excited to talk with you a little bit about your experience. Want to learn more about all your years of leadership experience and coaching leaders and of course, your organization as well. So we open up each show with our Beyond the Bio segment. I'll ask you a few questions to share more about yourself beyond the highlight reel as an opportunity to learn more about you and your business, of course.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
Let's start off by your proudest professional accomplishment.
Wow, proudest professional accomplishment. Well, I never really think about my proudest professional accomplishment. I usually think about that in my personal life. But if I were to think about my professional life, it probably would be the fact that I actually started a business, and I immigrated to the U.S. From Canada, and I knew 3 people when I moved to the U.S. I actually 2 of them were my parents. They were not buying anything from me, so I started a leadership consulting and coaching practice, basically knowing one person in the entire country, and was able to build that into a pretty thriving practice that is grown over the last 30 years. So I guess if I had to identify one, is that I actually survived that transition. I was pretty young when I made the transition, so I don't think I realized how complex the task I had ahead of myself was.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's an impressive start. It takes a lot of guts, regardless of where you're from, to go into a country and not know anyone really. So, wow. How about your superpower? Like, what do you consider your superpower when it comes to the work you do with leaders in your business?
Making the complex simple. I think making the complex is super easy. And I think a lot of times when you read leadership books and business books, it's like, man, it's so thick and there's so much in there and it's really complex. And I think, if when I think about the authors that I enjoy and what I've tried to do with my practice, it's making the complex simple, because simple is memorable is portable is usable. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out models and things that explain complex things in a simple way, so that leaders I know actually something I can do with that particular information.
I love that. There's so much power in simple. And I feel like, especially early on in a leadership journey, you almost try to overcomplicate things because it makes you, whether that makes you feel important, makes you feel smarter, or you're trying to project to others or whatever and show everything you know, right? And later on you realize, wow, it's actually just keeping it really simple that drives so much of the success, right?
Yeah, absolutely, without question. When we confuse people, a lot of times I go into organizations and I say, how clear are you in your expectations of what you want from your people? And leaders inevitably say, well, I'm crystal clear, because in their mind, they've been crystal clear. And then I go sort of talk to the people in the organization. And they're like, well, it depends on the day. It depends on what's happening. It depends on the last email. Well, that's not clarity. There's a lack of clarity in most organizations about what the number 1, 2, or 3 priorities that we need to be focused on are.
Yep. That word priority versus priorities is a good reminder as well. Like, the root of the word is in priority. It turned into an IES on the end, didn't it?
Yes, exactly.
If you could sum up your business and your role in that business, in a quick minute for us on just what you do.
Yeah, well, it's evolved over the years. It's when I first started the business, I was just trying to help anybody with anything they had challenges around, and we have continually focused the business into the leadership space, and now more specifically into the entrepreneur-led organization around leadership. I find that entrepreneur-led organizations or founder-led organizations are radically different in culture and the way they approach leadership than large organizations. Now, I've had fabulous success with some really, really big organizations, but when I think about where my greatest successes have been, they've always been, even if it was a really big company like Progressive Insurance, they're really entrepreneurial in the way that they approach things and the way they segment their business so that it doesn't become bureaucratic in nature.
Makes sense. Um, any takes on leadership or building teams or a business that may be a little contrary to what you may hear out, in the common content game out there? Do you kind of tend to focus on anything that is maybe a little bit different than what we usually hear?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that most people who engage in leadership development and listen, I love my HR friends and I love HR groups and training groups. The challenge quite often is that they're given an impossible task. They're given a task of developing leaders that in a manner that impacts business results, but everyone sees the initiative as an HR initiative because it's run by the HR group, it's run by the training group. So when we go into an organization, the very first question we ask is not what leadership behaviors need to shift. We want to know what business results need to shift because we want to make the initiative a business initiative, not an HR initiative. Now, HR can assist in that, but they can't manage it for the operational leaders because as soon as they do, it becomes an HR initiative. So the contrary view we have is that we want to know specifically what business results need to shift in our engagement with an organization, whether it be a person, whether it be a group, or whether it be one of our more strategic programs where we're working with the CEO plus the leadership team. So, the business results then lead to, okay, so tell me a little bit about what's happening in the organization that is blocking the business results you truly desire. And then where does leadership flow into that? So we're going to work on the leadership skills, behaviors, value sets, systems, but we want it to show up in those business results, and we're not afraid to track business results. In fact, we mandate that we track business results as we go through our leadership development processes.
No, that's great. It's got to be tied to the results, right? But we often get away from that, and it's, again, simple, but not always the case in a lot of companies. Sometimes the clear objectives, the results we're aiming for, are the last thing on people's minds compared to all the other things that are being thrown at them. So again, that priority, and I love the comment on, and coming from the talent, a lot of years in talent recruitment world, I can relate to that with the HR versus operational folks, right, and how that dynamic works. And a lot of times that's where the challenges really come with. We're doing all this training, we're investing in people, we're doing all this stuff, but none of the actual leaders that are tied to the output of the work are involved. They're kind of just, this is all being done for them versus with them.
Yes.
And you just have this big disconnect of just that gap of, well, it's not going to stick if we're not all bought in. If this is just HR or learning and development driving this, and even the really great HR business minds will tell you, it has to be a business initiative, right? It's not just an HR thing, right?
Yeah, without question. We're starting a leadership cohort next week, and I've talked to every single one of the leaders that are going into the program. So I have a conversation with them. I want to know, well, what does success look like? Why are you even investing in this person? What does the destination look like, and how's that going to impact the business? And so, our process is designed to create transparency. And I often joke it's like throwing stuff in a petri dish. If you remember your days in high school chemistry, you put stuff in a petri dish and it grew really fast. And in our programs, we don't do events, we do processes, and we pack about 2 years worth of sort of petri dish growth into about 4 months. So it's like whatever's happening, whatever challenges that leader has are going to show up like magnified as they go through this process, because we want them to see what's happening. Because if they can't understand and they're not self-aware about how they're contributing to the very challenges that they're frustrated by, then they won't be able to make the shift that is truly necessary for them to accomplish all they're supposed to be doing.
That's great. Could you tell us a little bit more, Andrew, about that leadership cohort? We'd love to hear a little bit more on what type of, how it's set up as far as the numbers and what types of leaders, anything like that you would like to share?
Yeah, well, we always tell our clients there are cheaper ways to pretend you're training your people. This is not that. Okay, so because a lot of the leadership development or any training is it's like about butts and seats. How cheaply can I put people into a training program? And this is not that program. This is an investment that organizations make in their leaders that they believe have the potential to grow and accelerate their progress. And so what we do is we don't allow a company typically to put more than 3 people into the cohort. The cohorts usually are up to 12 to 15 people. And our coaches work directly with them over a 4-month period. We set goals, and then every 2 weeks we have a facilitated group program where we do not teach the material. They've already watched the material. They've already worked through the material. They better have already applied the material back on the job, because in that call, what we're going to be talking about is, what did you do with the material? So the big gap that we see in a lot of leadership development programs is they make an assumption that it's a lack of knowledge. And I actually don't think that's the case. I think that quite often people have been to different leadership programs. They've had great training. They've had great coaching. The problem is in the application. The problem is in how to figure out how to actually do that with my team. So when you go to a full day leadership program and, that facilitator, that trainer is spinning off to another city the next day, and you're left with like those were great stories and those were great insights, but I'm not sure what to do with that. And so, in our case, we don't go away. 2 weeks later, we're having a conversation with Graham. So like, tell me a little bit about what you applied out of the module we just covered, whatever that specific leadership foundational skill was that we were working on. What challenges did you experience? Did it work? And if it worked, why do you think it worked? If it didn't work, let's dive into that. And so there's learning amongst the cohort, because you share, maybe your successes or maybe your challenges, and you get live coaching from somebody about how to shift. I think there's this idea that leadership is like a science, and I think it's way more art than science, right? We're dealing with the most complex organisms on the planet. And when you put, a team of 5, 10 together, it doesn't go up. That complexity doesn't go up linearly. It goes up exponentially. So as a leader, you're going to connect with some people and not with others. And so, it's the ones we're struggling with that we need the coaching around. And that program sort of goes through the entire arc of foundational skills, but it's really more about accountability for change than just teaching principles.
Well said, Andrew. I love the just tying it back to the implementation and action versus just information, knowledge sharing. Obviously, there's power in hearing that and learning the concepts.
Yeah.
But it's all in the application, right? Like you're really not learning if you're not applying it truly, and staying engaged throughout that process is seems like such a great way to do it versus the kind of just dump the information and exit, right? So
right.
How about in your own experience? Like what kind of experience have you had with leaders? Is there one that stands out as the most impactful in your life as a leader, where they were different than others, or just way better, or however you want to say it?
Well, I learned a ton from my first boss. I actually started my commercial career selling commercial air conditioning in Toronto, Canada. Big contracts, big, $1 million, $4 million, $5 million contracts. That was back a long time ago when that was a lot of money. But that was like, I learned a ton from him. And there's one particular thing, and he had a great skill of I knew he had my best interest in mind, but he was not the kindest, gentler boss. He was pretty brusque with me at times, but I knew he wanted me to be successful. So there's this one time I was working late, and I was the junior guy on the team, and Jim had a nice office just in front of me, and he'd throw stuff over the side of my cube, and I'd scramble to do it, and everything. So he came by my cube one day at about 6:00, and he said to me, "Oxley, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Jim, I'm doing all the stuff you've been giving me for the last, however many hours." And he's like, "Well, what are you working on?" I'm like, "I'm working on all this stuff." And I had plans all over the place. I had 2 large desks, and there were plans rolled out, and I was doing takeoffs and trying to get quotes and solving problems. And he said, He said, well, how long do you think you're going to be here for? And I said, I'm going to be here till midnight. He said, midnight? He said, let's go next door for a beer. I said, Jim, I don't want to go next door for a beer. And he's like, well, let's go next door for a beer. And I'm like, well, what do you do when your boss says that? So we went next door, and I'm thinking, well, this just adds, now it's going to be 12:30, 12:45, 1 o'clock before I leave. So we're having a beer, and he's asking what I'm working on. He says, I'll bet you I can have you out of there by 7. Well, by this point, it's like 6:20. And I'm like, there's no way. And he's like, yeah, we'll have you out of there by 7. So we come back in, and he's like a whirlwind going through stuff. Why are you doing this? Give this to Joel. Give this to Mark. Blah, 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 blah. We did do this, scrubbing notes on stuff. 6:59, we're walking out of the office. And this was the brilliance, I thought, of Jim. And he said to me, what time is it? I'm like, Jim, you know what time it is. And he's like, yeah, no, but what time is it? I said, it's 6:59. And he said, do you know why we're leaving at 6:59? And I said, yeah, because you helped me. And he said, no, we're leaving at 6:59 because I had a goal to leave by 7. You had a goal to leave when the work was finished. Now, there's 2 lessons I learned from that. The immediate lesson, which was that, I got to have a finish time to my day, because if I don't, and leaders, let me tell you, if you don't put a finish time on your day, the work will expand to meet the time allowed. There's no end to work. You can always work longer, right? So you got to have a finish time. But the more brilliant lesson, which I didn't even get at the moment until I really started studying leadership, that he had done, was he didn't assume that I'd learned the lesson. I hadn't learned the lesson he was trying to teach me. I just thought I was leaving early because he helped me. That was not what he was trying to teach me. He was trying to teach me that urgency creates productivity. Having a deadline creates productivity. When you allow your deadline to just float, you're not productive. And I've seen that manifest with leaders and in my own life for over the last 30 years. It is just so true. So a couple of things I want your audience to take from that. Number one, don't work till the work is complete. It is never complete. Have a deadline. Now, I get it. Maybe there's times you got to work longer because there's the reality is, life intervenes. You got deadlines you got to work for, but have an end time to your day that you really try to keep hard and fast to. And second of all, when you're coaching people, make sure they understand what you're trying to teach them and not just the surface level lesson. Because so often they miss the lesson. I see this all the time with people. They miss the deeper learning that you were really trying to impart.
That's really good story, Andrew. Thank you. That checking for comprehension on what the actual point is. I mean, because you're right. How many times will you ask somebody about what they took away from what you just walked through and it completely missed the point? They picked up on your points, but they didn't get the actual real important point, the theme or however you want to say it. They're just kind of like, check the box. I picked up, do this. No. Like the bigger picture is going to, take you forward in a much more powerful way than just, the tactical things. Right.
Yeah. So. And then we complain that, well, they don't see the big picture. I'm like, well, whose fault's that? Right. I mean, that's our fault as leaders. If they don't see the big picture, it's because they haven't been shown the big picture. And, we're like, well, I showed them. Well, communication has only occurred when a message is sent, received, and acted upon. So I might have spoken, but I didn't communicate. So
true. So one thing, Andrew, that I've been thinking a lot about is, first of all, you said it earlier on, earlier on in my leadership journey, it was like, oh, leadership's a playbook, it's scientific approach, right? 1, 2, 3, that's what you do. And then I realized it's not a playbook at all, right? Every person, every team, every company is so different. Every leader is so different. When you think about, how you approach this, like, those examples you just walked through and how people are so different, like, any thoughts on, whether it's situational leadership or meeting people where they are or however you want to look at it, any thoughts on just being able to shift your approach to the individual, not just the company situation and the goals and all that, but, those one-on-one conversations, those directives or those expectations or just coaching, like you said, like how do you approach that?
Yeah, and then we've got a number of models we use around this, but the very high level concept that I would communicate to leaders is that we were all taught the golden rule when we were, treat other people the way you would want to be treated, and that I always say that's fantastic in morality and ethics. It's horrible in leadership, because basically what that means is that everyone's like me. I'm if I don't mind people like being really harsh with me and very pounding, then I should be okay doing that to other people, because you can speak that way to me. In fact, leaders say this all the time. Like, I don't speak any way to my employees that I wouldn't be okay with my boss speaking to me. Well, that's a horrible standard. Like,
Yeah.
so that would presume that everyone's like you. One of my favorite things to say to first level leaders is, are you frustrated by your employees? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, why are you frustrated? And they're like, well, because I would never act the way that they act. If my boss asked me to do something, I would have done it. I wouldn't argue with them or not done it. And I'm like, and you got promoted to leadership because you were not like everyone else. Now, I'm not saying those behaviors that you're identifying are okay or we should accept them, but to presume that you are normal and they're abnormal by definition, then, right? They're abnormal is actually inaccurate. They're actually normal. You're abnormal. Now, that doesn't mean you don't need to coach them up and move them forward, but let's not make them abnormal. Normal is basically a statistical reference point that means more alike than not. So they are more alike than not. So let's figure out what we need to do differently rather than trying to fix them, because nobody likes to be fixed. So you start with the presumption, first of all, that they're not broken, right? They're just not where they need to be. Now, that's actually the definition of leadership. Leadership is about taking people or an organization on a journey. In fact, we always tell our clients, if a journey is not present, a leader is not required. You only need a leader if there's a journey involved. So as a leader, you will always be taking people on a journey from somewhere to somewhere. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing you got to recognize is what works with one person will not work with another person. And you have to understand a little bit how to communicate with different types of people so that you connect. And when you don't connect with someone, if you make it their fault, then you're absolved of all responsibility of figuring out how you perhaps needed to be different. So that's the high level answer, Graham.
No, that's really good, Andrew. And that's actually one other thing I wanted to mention. So you just led me right to it. So how about that? Just as a leader, looking in the mirror first before you go to those frustrations you mentioned. Like, I'm frustrated with my employees. This person's not doing that. I'm not getting this support. All the things that other people aren't doing well. What is your response when it comes to just that concept of how a leader can really look within first before they try to, like you said, change people or change behaviors and things like that?
Yeah, well, there's two parts to every problem, right? There's the part we have no control or influence over, and the part we have some control or influence over. And I'll often ask leaders, does it ever frustrate you that your employees always want to talk about the part that they can't do anything about? And they're like, yeah. Well, your job is to get them to focus on the part they can do something about. So let's come back to you as a leader. So when you focus on what the employees are doing wrong, that's the part of the problem you can't do anything about. The only part of that problem you can actually do anything about is how you're going to interact with them differently. So you have to decide, are you going to be a victim and talk about what's wrong, or are you going to focus on what you can do? Now, the counterpoint to that from leaders is, well, I could do everything right and they still won't move. And I'm like, absolutely true. But then you're absolved of responsibility because you are responsible to them, but not for them. You're responsible to them to create an environment where they can be successful, where it's a motivational environment, where you're creating a culture of accountability. But ultimately, it is their decision whether they move forward or not. But to say, I'm not going to do the things I need to do because they might not change, That's like your employee saying, well, I'm not going to do everything I could do because I don't know if it's going to make a difference. And you'd
Right.
never accept that from an employee. So why would you accept it from yourself?
Yeah, you kind of summed up a version of an unhealthy team right there as well. Like, Joey's not doing his part, Susie's not doing hers, so I'm not going to do mine. It's,
Right.
well, that's going to be a pretty dysfunctional team if every time we take somebody's dysfunction, we make it our own, right?
Yeah.
So
That's
can't
right.
other people's gaps can't be our excuses, type of thing. So,
Yes.
um, so what some of the things I see when I look at your work, Andrew, um, the trouble with the rat race is even if you win, you're still a rat.
Right.
So, and anything you would like to comment for leaders on that statement?
Well, that statement I found at the bottom of the Globe and Mail, which is the national newspaper in Canada. And I was working in Toronto at the time, and I picked up the newspaper. This is back remember when they used to deliver newspapers to your front door? I
Yeah, that
picked
was
up
the
the
thing at one
newspaper one
point. Yeah.
morning, and I'm reading this. It was called Your Morning Smile, and I'm reading it. I'm like, oh crap! And I was shaving that morning, and I'm thinking, I'm just going to be a big rat. That's all I'm going to be. I'm going to be a big rat, and I don't want to be a rat. So I actually did something really insightful. I didn't actually realize what I was doing at the time. I actually cut it out of the newspaper and I put sellotape on both sides of it. I didn't have a laminator, so I just taped it on both sides and I stuck it in my wallet. I'm like, how do I change my life? Now, the psychology behind that is that whatever you focus on in your life gets bigger. So what we have a tendency to focus on is the problems, the challenges, frustrations, and they just magnify in our lives. But what I focused on was a question I did not have the answer to. And I didn't forget about the question. I kept coming back to it and kept coming back to it and kept coming back to it. Like I would challenge your audience to think about, what are the questions that I don't have answers to, that if I had an answer to would improve the quality of my life. Now, the way you find out what that question is to identify the problems and challenges you're experiencing. So if, for example, a problem I hear from leaders all the time is, my team isn't motivated or, people aren't, engaged. And I'm like, okay, so the question then is, how do I, as a leader, create an environment that is more motivational for my team? Now, it's not about football tables and beanbag chairs. People are engaged when they feel productive, when they feel successful, when they feel like they're moving their life forward. Now, so the question is, how do I do that as a leader? How do I create an environment like that? Do I want to create an environment like that? And if I do, the fact that I don't know how to do it is immaterial because there are many, many people who figured that out. All you have to do is be asking the right question. It's not that we have, we don't have ways to figure these things out. We're not even asking the right questions. The question we typically ask if we have an unmotivated team is, why is my team so unmotivated? And why questions will always get you to an answer, but it won't be a helpful answer. Well, because, young people today don't want to work hard. They don't appreciate how difficult my job is. My boss is unreasonable. The company sets unreasonable. You'll get a million answers, but they will keep you stuck exactly where you are today. You got to change your why questions into how questions. How do I do this? Now, the frustrating part of that is you don't know the answer. So what we see is we get busy with what we do know. And we stay stuck exactly where we are. When I put that little saying in my wallet, I didn't know how to fix that. In fact, it took me many years to figure it out. But I kept asking, how do I do that? How do I do that? 30 some years later, I'm still talking about that quote because it was the genesis of the entire idea of where I am today. So if you're finding yourself caught in the rat race, the question isn't, how do I need to change my external circumstances? How I need to change me. Because what I got wrong in that instance actually was I thought the problem was my job. And the problem with leaving your job is you take the biggest problem with you, and it's yourself. And I essentially what I did initially was I recreated the same problems I had at Train in my next job. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, that didn't work. Well, it has to be me. It has to be the way I'm doing the work not the company that I'm working for, because I was the boss in the second company. So it had to be me. There was nobody
Yeah,
else to blame.
yeah, right. No one else to blame at that point. Yeah. Uh, so much power in questions. We, especially leaders that are working on improving, we focus so much on having answers,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it's improving ourselves, our people, our business. The questions just bring so much power to acknowledging what we don't know or what we need to understand, things like that. And then that point you make about just that personal accountability is so strong, and leaders being able to really look at like understanding what we're good at, what we're not. That's having that self-awareness or developing it, so we can actually understand. Because you're right, like it's so true. If you take yourself and put yourself in another job, you better understand what's going to change, right? Because it's not always that job, right? If you approach the same way, you bring the same mentality, you do the same things, you connect with people the same way, well, you probably are going to expect the same results,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So true for sure. So I guess, Andrew, you've shared a lot of great stuff, really good points, and I can see how those cohorts get a lot of value, especially as you stay engaged through the process. Um, what's one thing that you've changed your mind on over the span of your career?
Yeah, well, a lot. In fact, I often joke that I should have been indicted for incompetence when I first started, because I actually didn't really know very much, but I thought I did.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
think I know a lot less now, but I know a lot more. Uh, Leadership is a really deep subject, you know. Um, but one of the things I used to say, and I remember saying this to groups, and I said it for a number of years when I first started teaching leadership, was leaders like change and followers don't. And that's actually not true. I think leaders often like change because it's their change. It's the thing they brought to the table. Well, we all like our own changes. It's other people's changes that we often don't like, right? Now, I think that the question becomes is not, do people like change or not like change? Sometimes the people bringing the change is not well thought through change, and people have said, well, yeah, we tried this and it didn't work. What's going to be different this time? And we just hear that as like they don't want to change. And so I think really sort of slowing down and looking at the different ways that people approach change, and not thinking that if they're resistant, that means they don't want to change. The question is what's behind that? What's actually happening? And the way you know this is true is if you stick around for long enough, someone will start trying to change the things that were your changes. And you're not going to like that, because that's my stuff. Wait a minute. That was the change I brought to the organization. Why do we want to change that? Right. So there is different levels of resistance to change depending on your behavioral style and the way you see the world, without question. But that doesn't mean people don't like change. It just means they approach it differently.
So true. Andrew, before we wrap up, what else would you like to highlight about your work?
Well, I guess what I figured out a long time ago, years ago, I had a mentor and I was struggling building the business. And he said to me, quit worrying about the new customers and service the ones you have now really well. And I'm like, yeah, but I need some more customers. He's like, yeah, if you service the ones you have really well now, and you stop worrying about where your business is going to come from, you're going to do so well. And so I made a decision after that. I made a decision that whether someone is an existing customer or whether there's a potential customer, I'm just going to serve them. So we actually do a 90-minute workshop where we actually dive deep into a lot of challenges that leaders are experiencing, and we give all that away to our prospective clients for free. And so if you go to transformingresults.com, it'll say live workshop on there. You can register for that workshop, and we will we'll give you the whole enchilada for 90 minutes. And if at the end of that you're like, man, if there's this much content that they're willing to give away for free, how much more could I get out of a relationship where I joined a leadership cohort, for example? We're happy to have that conversation with you. But we're more interested, like my passion is in helping leaders create a life where at the end of the day, there's more of them available for the people that they truly love, and they don't come home feeling like they just got to sit down in front of the TV and veg out because they need to just recharge. At the end of the day, if you're a catalyst for your organization, there should be more of you left for the people you truly love. And unfortunately, for many leaders, that's not the way they feel. So I'm on a mission to help leaders do that. So everything we do is around that. Now, we want people to get great business results, whether at work, for sure. But I think it's a false choice that I have to, drive myself into a heap of ashes at the end of the day to create great business results, because that's not leading. You're pushing the rock up the hill. You don't have a team doing it with you.
Well said. I think you kind of summed up what I normally close. So we'll leave it there, Andrew. Thank you for your time today. We appreciate you sharing.
Thank you, Graham. It was a pleasure chatting with you.